Okay. Good morning, everyone. It's really a pleasure to see the room almost full, although it's still early. Welcome to our session on what the media needs to change to meet the needs of the Global South. I am Ahmed Abu Hamad from Jazeera Media Institute, and we have with us today Dr. Yafa Al-Masri. She's a PhD in human geography, and also the Media Initiatives Director from Jazeera Media Institute, Muntasir Mer'i, basically my boss. Just before starting, like the whole night yesterday, I was just thinking why there are 3 Palestinian diaspora are joining this session and talking about this topic. Is it that we grew up with the books of Edward Said in the libraries of our families, or is it that something that we really tangent and feel it all the time? I didn't find like an actual question, but for sure, like this discussion about the Global South and decolonization didn't start with us with the war in Gaza. We started working on it immersively in our work in Jazeera Media Institute very early. Because I think we realized that there is a real gap when it comes to the theories in the Middle East and how can we reflect it on our work. So when we decided to work on it in a more like a methodological way, we found like there is sort of guidebook that helped us, which is Communication for Development for Benjamin Yuzu. He's African, and in that book, he was urging the journalists to talk to experts in order to improve their work. Back then, we thought, okay, it's very important for us to talk to such experts who are really like involved in these discussions and topics in a proper way, better than journalists. And you know, when journalists usually talk to experts, it's because they don't want to cry and they bring someone else to cry for them. But we thought that we will not do that. We will do it as like an actual belief. This is why we went to Dr. Yafa, who is very much into the topic of decolonization, and she herself a Palestinian refugee. She worked in the refugee camps for years. So she does have this like personal experience and also like theoretical experience. And from that point, we took like the discussions further, and we worked quite a few times in preparing our methods to work on decolonizing the media, even in our work. So I will like just give the table to Dr. Yafa to talk a little bit more about her work and to just tell you a little bit about the issues of representation and decolonization that we worked on theoretically, and we tried to reflect it on our work in the field work. So welcome, Yafa.
Thank you, Ahmed. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. As Ahmed has already disappointed you, I'm not a journalist and I don't work on media. I mostly work on refugee studies. I'm a human geographer. So I thought it might be useful when working with Al Jazeera to try to contextualize media a little bit, both historically and politically. So I thought it might be useful to talk a little bit about representation, how we represent others, because this is what media has been doing for a long time, and the relationship or the roots of that in colonialism and coloniality. And I think normally when I try to tell people about the deep impact that media has on communities of the global majority for specific, it's normally really hard for them to understand how much the reports they do and the reporting they do it. I think it's really hard for people to kind of grasp the kind of impact on individual and community life. So normally I try to tell them this little personal story of mine, which Ahmad kind of gave an introduction to. I was born and raised in a small refugee camp for Palestinians in Lebanon. And in that refugee camp, we would always have a flood of reporters. There's always the journalists, videographers. There's always these people coming with their cameras, and they're always taking photos of us. And they're normally photos that look like this. Better? Like this photo that you see. And in my community, we used to have a name for these photos. We used to call them UNICEF photos. And it wasn't because it was related to UNICEF, and sometimes it wasn't even related to humanitarian aid. But there was always that consistent thread of journalists or videographers or people with cameras who are taking a photo of you at your weakest. When you're really vulnerable, in the photos you always look dirty, you're barefoot, you're hungry, you're helpless, you're miserable, you're dependent on a foreign entity, you're being rescued by someone else. And I think what media doesn't really understand is that this photo that you export to the world becomes the only way that the world is able to know you. So the rest of the world that has absolutely no contact with you is not able to fathom a refugee or a person of the global majority outside this scope, outside a person that looks like this. And therefore, for the rest of the world, they're not able to fathom a refugee or a person that comes from a displacement background as someone who can be clean, as someone who can be educated, as someone who might have an intellectual contribution, as someone who can contribute to policy, as someone who can work in politics, as someone who can shape their own communities. It just becomes impossible, and it becomes this cage that you lock us in. So these photos become a prison, and this prison shapes how the world communicates with us. Now, even though I gave this example about refugee spaces and about refugees, this isn't something geographically bound, because this is something that we do see across regions of the global majority. So across the world, we see this in communities. But what's really interesting is that this isn't also something that expands geographically, this is also something that expands historically. So if we're looking at a history of colonialism, a lot of scholars already agree that one of the biggest superpowers of colonialism is lying. The way or the reason that colonialism was able to maintain itself for so long and is able to persuade the masses to be part of it was through lying about itself and others and about how it represented others. And there was this really interesting work, which is unfortunately not modern, but it is true. It's the work by Schneider, who has worked on French media, and he analyzed the French media between the 1870s to the 1900s, and he was trying to understand what was the role of media in sustaining colonialism. And he explores how actually French colonialism kind of weaponized the French media in a way to export a specific image of Africa, the Africa that needs to be colonized. And in a way, he finds these two specific images. So France was strategizing these two specific images of Africa. There was the Africa of conquest, and there was the Africa of exploitation. So they were trying to export two specific visuals of Africa, one that is an Africa that is volatile, that is aggressive. So we need to conquest it, we need to tame it through military means. And an Africa of exploitation is this rich image of Africa, this rich country that has so many resources, and so we need to have these resources, we need to make use of them for us and for the rest of humanity. Edward Said, as Ahmed has already said, we're already obsessed, but he also said something very similar about how all these inaccurate cultural representations become an excuse or a justification for interfering in places. So the more the West represents the East as primitive, as volatile, as irrational, the more it justifies external domination. But what we really like about Said's work, that it wasn't something that was limited to colonialism, and he was also talking about Hollywood movies, about modern day media, and how they actually represent the Arab in a certain way, and how that justifies military interventions. So there's this persistent thread of how we represent people and how we justify our violence towards them. So let's think of it in today's world, and more specifically, let's think of it in terms of Palestine. And I think that almost everyone in this room has seen Trump's AI-generated video of Gaza. And for those who didn't, Trump has just generated this video, posted it on his social media, and the video that's generated by AI depicts what Gaza would look like if US forces take over, or when they take over. And we see in this video, Gaza's beaches transformed into luxurious resorts. We see the port of Gaza becoming this international trade hub for the world. We see Gaza becoming inclusive and peaceful and happy, and money is falling from the sky, and suddenly it's paradise. And what this kind of representation is trying to really export is specifically, again, that this is a space that has so much potential. This is a space that can be a paradise, but its native people don't have what it takes intellectually. It doesn't have what it takes in terms of resources. It doesn't have what it takes in terms of capacities to be able to make it the paradise that it can be. Try to think of this in light of the first image that I showed you. We know the refugee as someone who cannot do anything. They cannot rebuild, they cannot contribute to policy, they have nothing to show. They're busy trying to find food for themselves. And this is exactly the same image in a way. The Palestinians, the native, are being shown as people who are so worried about their own displacement that they don't have the potential to make it this paradise. And therefore, this necessitates the intervention of international powers to be able to make it the paradise that it can be. Now, what do we do about it? How do we break from all this colonial legacy and this colonial cycle of representing people over and over in the same way? The most prominent theories of decolonization come from Fanon, and he really talks about colonization in a really interesting way, and he views it as this gap between the essence and the image, a gap between who we really are and what image is shown of us. And he talks about destroying this gap, but also destroying these images, and try to think, who are we without colonialism, and try to rebuild these images. And what's really interesting about what he says is that, when we destroy the images, we're left with nothing. How do we communicate? How do we know each other? How do we build? How do we connect? And therefore, we do need to build new images. So we do need to build communication channels and have representation, but it has to be a proper one. And I think one of the nicest reformations of Fanon's work is the work of Akil Mbembe, who says, that progress is about, changing ourselves from craftsmen and craftswomen into more technologically advanced people who work with machines and becoming so industrialized, but actually decolonization is about becoming craftsmen and craftswomen, but this time working with our hands on our image and our representation and taking it into our own hands and building who we really are. But what does that mean in media? What does it look like to decolonize media? And in other words, what does media have to change in order to truly meet the requirements of the Global South? I think, in short, it has to be interrupting the colonial framework and the colonial ways of representing people. And finally, taking a back seat for once and putting people of the global majority at the center stage, and stop speaking on behalf of people and telling their stories and giving voice to the voiceless, because people have their voices. They don't need your voice to narrate it for them. People can narrate their own stories. You just have to put them center stage to do that, and you have to lend the resources. On more practical terms, always ask yourself, who's benefiting from the image that I'm exporting? Is it really benefiting the global majority? Is it really benefiting the communities at the center? Also, the world is way more diverse than the institutions that are currently than the institutions that are currently taking over the media of the world. The world is way more diverse than that. Why are there only white institutions in power or in charge of media? Who gets to decide what is newsworthy? Who gets to decide this story is valuable, this story is interesting, this story is not? Shouldn't communities be responsible for that? And who's currently responsible for it? Who has the power to say, this goes on the front page, this isn't interesting enough? And shouldn't we start to change that a little bit? It's important to always critically examining which binaries we're enforcing. It's really important to redistribute resources, especially ones that have been robbed from the global majority, and it's time to give them back. And I think just in general, finally, reflexivity and accountability and holding ourselves accountable for the past and the present, and to continuously reflect to change that. I'm going to leave it here with my colleagues to kind of give you a more practical reflection.
Yeah, thank you, Yafa. I just have like one question that is related to some things that you have talked about, and also like a former discussion that we had before. That like you have used the term global majority instead of like global south, and I told you before how much fond I am with how much academia is reflective and being able to switch and move from like former structures to new ones compared to journalism, which is like, I hope that we will not lose it. But how do you think that like journalists can benefit from this like flexibility of like questioning themselves and their terms and their methods that they are using?
Yeah, I think this is interesting. I think as geographers, we probably take maps and directions so sensitively. So when people use the term global south, or for example, the term the Middle East, it's south for who? Or it's east or middle for who? And who gets to decide that they are the center of the world and everybody is east and west of them? And I know that we've been using different terms across time, you know, whether that's developed and developing nations, global south, but I think that that goes under the realm of reflexivity and accountability and thinking back on what we're using and what we should be using. The term global majority comes from the fact that the majority of the world is not Europe and US and white people, so why we are actually the majority. People of color, people of different ethnicities, people from the East, people from all the, we are actually the majority. And it is kind of a term that implies, you know, the power of being the majority who are fighting racism and who are fighting Eurocentrism and who are fighting coloniality. I'm going to touch very quickly on the question of academia, and I do acknowledge that academia also has its own colonial legacy. I think both journalism and academia have a history of being exploitative because they are both disciplines that go to communities and extract knowledge. So I do think that they both have to deal a lot with their colonial legacies. But I do think that academia and journalism can really benefit from this collaboration in decolonizing and learning from each other how they can change things, how they can decolonize the way they are dealing with communities and getting information. And I think a cooperation like this can really build pathways to more ethically dealing with communities. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so now I have to just think a little bit about the words that I'm going to use in asking my boss. So I will move to Muntasir, and like I know that the work with Yafa was not really easy to be integrated in journalism, but also like in Jazeera Media Institute, you were also following how much these biases are impacting and affecting the people in the global south, and like although you are doing your best in like finding alternatives and solutions, but still the issue is way bigger than what we can expect. So like, would it be possible to just put us in the loop of...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Shukran, Ahmed, thank you. Good morning, everybody. I learned as a journalist to be the voice of the voiceless, and I learned to listen to people. But who is listening to us? Who is listening to journalists? So I'm here today with my colleagues to share our pain, because what happened in Gaza shattered our faith in all values and practices in journalism. So as of today, like, I changed this presentation maybe 5 times because the number keep increasing.
We cannot see it on the screen.
Yeah. 210 journalists killed in Gaza till end of March by the Israeli occupation. And if you see the numbers by the international organizations, it's even less than this. I respect what they are doing, but even the Palestinian journalist is even not recognized or even exists sometimes. Now this Malik bin Nabi is an Algerian philosopher. He said, West doesn't carry its values outside its border. Why I'm saying this? Because we believe that the West positioned itself and presented itself as a model and authority in politics, in morality, in culture, in everything, and even in journalism. But I think after what happened in Gaza war, they failed us in all values and practices. They taught us how to fight disinformation, and they conduct the disinformation itself. They taught us how to protect yourself and journalism safety, and they let our colleagues to die in Gaza without any protection. They taught us about gender equality, and they let our female journalists killed in Gaza without any protection, etc. And by the way, these standards, values, and ethics practices, we have never engaged with, never contributed with it. We have just to follow and to comply. As a global South, between practice, we have never engaged in this conversation, or we are not able even to question it. So let me take you in a quick journey about the media hegemony as a result of this. Of course, this is the mainstream media in the Western countries, the BBC, New York Times, Deutsche Welle, etc. What we have learned since I was young, what is journalism. And these are the news agency, the major news agencies like AP, Reuters, France Press. They established in the early 19th centuries, as you can see. I'll take one example from the mainstream media. In the United States alone, there is 5 multinational corporations control more than 1,400 daily newspapers, 6,000 assorted magazines, 10,000 radio, 2,700 TV stations, 2,600 publishing houses. Can you imagine the concentration of media organizations in the hands of a few people that are serving their own interests or the political class in the United States? So we thought that the world is really diversity. There's a big diversity in media. It's concentrated, and I think there's so many examples in Europe as well. I'll take Reuters as an example because it has been described in many research as an empire within an empire. And I like this when they describe the group of news agencies, including Reuters, as a cartel. And you know, cartel is a terminology or we use for the gangs who are smuggling drugs. And in the early 20th century, there was a secret agreement between Reuters and the British government to disseminate and distribute the news from within the colony, within the empire and the colonies all around the world. And we can understand that the media bias and controlling the narrative is constructed. It's not new. Maybe in Gaza, after Gaza war, it's more obvious. After the war in Syria or in Sudan, in Yemen, it's more obvious. But it's really constructed long time ago. And when you go to the digital platforms, the giants are all concentrated in the United States, except TikTok, which is there is a war now because it's from China. They're all concentrated in the United States. And you can imagine the digital hegemony when it comes from one place. There's no real diversity. And I think it's digital slavery because we are like living in a bubble and controlled by the flood of information. So it's not even a flow. I used to call it a flow. It's a flood of information coming from the north to the south. In the south, we are not heard. We can't shift the narrative. And I would take you in Gaza as a model for the media hegemony. This is like a simple example, and I can show you hundreds of these examples between there is 3 days apart on this piece. 5 killed by a Russian strike in central Ukraine. It's obvious who's the killer. But when it comes to Gaza, nobody knows who's the killer. The bomb came from where? From the Mars? From the space? Same when it comes to the bombing hospitals. The Russians, is obvious they are the killers. When it comes to Gaza, we don't know the killers. This is the CNN. People are starving in Gaza, but why? Because of the environment? Why? There's no mention that the Israelis are cutting the food, the water, the electricity, and it's a war crime. And you can see a lot of examples on all the same, starving, famine, from where it came. Nobody can mention this. So it's not only a constructional bias, it's controlling the flow of information from the north to the south. We are captured by this, we are a prisoner of this. And we used to complain as a journalist from disinformation and misinformation, and who is complicit now with this information? Journalists. Media are complicit in disinformation. We keep blaming like normal people or citizen journalists that they are disseminating all fake news. Actually, the media is complicit in that. So what are the key problems of journalism coming from the north, in my opinion? It's always from top to down. There is a superiority in morality, in culture, in social, in everything. We are always in the bottom. Somebody always in the bottom. We feel that. Even when people like they are understanding us, they are talking to us from the top. It's always loaded with ideology, with political or cultural or economic agenda. And if you can observe the media behavior in the Western countries, the mainstream media in the West, it's aligned with their foreign policy. Look for New York Times, for example, in the war in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Palestine. It's aligned with the foreign policy of the United States. And here we can see like Liz Cheney, a Republican representative. She was replying on Elon Musk after suspension of US aid. It's obvious that it was a part of a war on the Soviet communism or Cold War, etc. So it's loaded with agenda. It wasn't for the sake of democracy. So you can't convince me that Western media, mainstream Western media, they are promoting democracy or freedom of expressions or independent media after the Gaza war. International media institutions, they have stripped the human rights discourse from its local context and political context. It seems like we have to be a part of the local agenda of France or UK or United States. Is that we don't have the right to fight for our own battle for independence, liberation, or against dictatorships or colonialism. We don't have this right. As Frantz Fanon said, like black skin, white mask. We have to be like this so the West can accept us. In the global South, we used to struggle against any authority. But the mainstream media, digital platforms, algorithms, etc., become an authority itself. In a short, like colonialism, like left from the door and back from the window. Simply like that. We always in the global South judged by the standards in the North. Always I'm saying like what applies in Switzerland doesn't apply in Somalia. It's totally different. You can't apply these standards. You have to understand the local context, and you must be like freed from any local or cultural context. So before it's too late, international media, Western international media or media institutions, they must review their values and practices before it's too late. And what looks like truth for us doesn't look truth for you, and what looks truth for you doesn't look truth for us. And I'll show like quick examples for that. The Guardian apologized after like 100 years of backing Balfour Declaration in Palestine. New York Times apologized the misinformation after misinformation in Iraq, right? And the Atlantic recently published a story about bombing Yemen. If you noticed, they published the story like after bombing, not before. They got the information before. And this, the editorial value went for their scoop, not for saving people's lives. While journalism has to save people's life. So always too late. And you know, it's easy like to commit the crime and say, oh, apologize. We are brave because we apologized. And that's what I exactly call impunity. We have learned in journalism that one of the key duty of journalism is to monitoring and questioning the centers of powers. I think now today media is complicit in genocide and war crime. And we have to question the media itself. Maybe same as what happened in Rwanda, we have to bring media to the ICC and ICJ. And thank you.
Thanks, Montasser. I just want to ask you, like, from where you from where you ended. You were saying that, like, before it's too late, the media should act or move. But, like, before it's too late, what? Like, we have witnessed an ongoing genocide. Okay, so it's taking place right now. It's not coming in the future, and it's not something that we predict that it will happen. So, like, isn't it already too late? Like, even if the media has tried to reflect the needs of the global South in wherever, like, not just in Gaza, because what we have seen is not, maybe Gaza is the peak, but we have seen this attitude almost everywhere in the global South. So, like, how many genocides do we need in order to convince the media and journalism that they should act and reform themselves from within before losing all of their legacy?
Yeah, it's too late, actually. Yes, I totally agree. And the problem is that we used to blame the governments, the centers of power, and today we are blaming our colleagues, the journalists who think like they failed us, who taught us the values and the practices. They failed us, and we can see the double standards when it comes to Gaza. While in Ukraine is totally different, or in other countries, and not specifically in Gaza. So the last hope for us is our colleagues. That's why we want to share our pain with them, to stand for a global and universal values. We need universal values, not something dedicated for, like, I'm sorry, for white men. So we have to keep the conversation. If it happens today, we hope nothing will happen in the future. And I think one of my duties in this life is to bring not only politicians to the justice, even some journalists who complicit with genocide in Gaza.
Okay, thank you. So, like, we now are going to open the door for, like, some comments, questions, stuff like that. So there will be a mic. Just a second. Can we start here?
Check. Thank you very much. I concur with a lot of assumptions that you were mentioning about decolonization. Now, you're from Al Jazeera, coming from one of the richest countries on earth and from one of the most powerful media outlets in the region. In the Arab language region, but you became like a global player. Now I wonder what the conclusions that you were drawing mean for yourself, for your media outlet, and where you would locate yourself in the global South or North.
Look, when I say, like, we didn't decide to be, I know it's, nobody agrees, we don't all agree on global South terminology. We didn't decide to be South, or we didn't pick this terminology. But I think we have been forced to position ourselves in this place, because there is, like, somebody who wanted to define himself. He created the other, and we are the other, and we have to position ourselves in the global South. I don't know if I answered the question.
It's a power relation, right? So you're like coming from an extremely powerful. You're coming from an extremely powerful country. So now I wonder.
I don't know if it's really how powerful is it, but
well, I know how powerful it is.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. But in Al Jazeera, I mean, in Al Jazeera we are not like the voice of Qatar. I think we are not the voice of Qatar. We are trying to be the voice of people and the voice of, let's say, the global South. We're representing people from the margin or from different country which doesn't exist in the media before. When you see the CNN or a BBC, etc. So we're coming from a different part of the world.
Yeah, okay, but I mean, you're referring to specific ethical standards. But to which extent are you applying these ethical standards in your own backdoor? I mean, you know the limits, right? So I'm just wondering, like, you also have like a specific like bias and agenda, or no? And you're like very well funded. Now, to which extent are you really representing the voiceless or like the global South? I mean, no.
So like, I think, Hendrik, that you are mixing between a newly rich country and a powerful country. Okay, I don't think that Qatar is like as powerful as Italy, for example, or as rich as Italy as well. But like, I'm not speaking like on behalf of Qatar.
Yeah.
They can speak for themselves. As long as they are powerful, they can defend themselves. But I will talk about Al Jazeera itself, okay? When you see how Al Jazeera was from the beginning trying to give more space to the opposition that is really being excluded from the mainstream media of each country in the Arab world. And when Al Jazeera was trying to engage with the issues of the people, and still is engaging with the issues of the people, what Al Jazeera have done during the Arab Spring, where like I think that Muntasir was in Libya, in Maidan al-Tahrir, in many areas, just for covering the Arab Spring, where like the mainstream media in the region was trying to not just ignore and neglect what is happening in the fields, but also like demonize it, okay? So I think also Al Jazeera have done its best to be the voice of the voiceless for years and years. For example, what's happening in Gaza right now, Al Jazeera is one of the rare TV channels that
Afghanistan, we were the only TV station covering the war in Afghanistan in 2001, while most of the reporters they were covering from DC or from London, covering the war in Afghanistan. We had a reporter in Kabul, and they bombed our office as well in that time. So we are trying, and I don't agree the Qatar is a powerful country. It's under pressure, and even the Americans keeping pressure on Al Jazeera and on Qatar itself to make a pressure on Al Jazeera. I don't want to turn this conversation about Al Jazeera itself, but I think Al Jazeera is trying to shift the narrative from south to the north, but it's not among the powerful countries with a powerful like mainstream media. We are struggling, and we feel we are alone. Out of alternative and small independent media in the Western countries, we are struggling.
Thank you. Here, please.
Thank you. I'm Patrick Adara from the New Humanitarian. I wanted to ask about the what your research and your experience have, the implications they have for media ethics, for the ideas of the roles of media and how they should be conducting themselves. So ideas such as objectivity, such as neutrality in crisis. Do you think media needs to rethink the ethics within which they do their work? The journalists need to essentially change their conceptions of and their codes of ethics to reflect decoloniality.
Yeah, I can quickly hint on that and then give the floor to my colleagues. I do think that neutrality has been something that has been in debate for the past few decades, even in humanitarian aid itself, and there's been a lot of critique of what does it mean to be neutral, because through research, it's been looking like neutral means abiding specifically by the policies of whoever is funding you, basically. There is this really beautiful concept by Donna Haraway, and she speaks about situated knowledges, and she says that there are no unfiltered lenses or images in the world. Even our human eyes show us things a certain way, because the color of this wall is not really what it is. The human lens shows it that way. A camera lens is the same. So the way you see things is pretty much being socially engineered by your experiences, by your positionality, by your funding, by the political context. So what does it really mean to be neutral? What does it really mean to provide something unfiltered? Is it realistic? Are we putting that pressure on ourselves? But then there's also the danger of, if we're letting this to be completely free, what slippery slope are we going towards? So it is tricky. I don't think anyone has answers for that. But what I want to say is there's a lot of critique towards being neutral and how being neutral is really weaponized to silence people who are really at the margin and who are being under genocide in a lot of cases.
Just like a very fast reflection, because I have heard this question for like almost 1,000 times. So basically like this whole discussion about neutrality or objectivity needs to just go back a little bit further. The milestone in journalism is not neutrality or objectivity, it's truth. And when we look at truth for today, we can see how much performative it became when it comes to the Western media. They publish like clear lies, okay, but because they have got the information with a specific way or method, then they think that they seek truth, okay? And we have seen this hundreds or thousands of times during the war in Gaza, and we're publishing like clear lies, okay, for everyone, but still they publish it, and when you are publishing it, you are giving it like this legacy of being a truth. It's becoming a truth because you are publishing it. So like you are like really contributing in like spreading fake news by just publishing it, and you are taking it from like spokesperson or from an official or something like that, then it becomes true, okay? So like truth itself, it became very performative, and all of the ethics became very performative. And this needs an actual discussion among all of journalists to just go back to the actual practices of journalism.
Just a quick follow-up. Without just focusing on neutrality or objectivity specifically, I'm really thinking about how the media does its work and how it perceives itself and its role within covering the news, how it comes up with news values. Because, for example, if you look at whether crises are actually covered, vast majority of them never appear in our newspapers. We never hear about what's happening in the CAR or in Sudan, and stuff. So should journalists really rethink how they decide what is newsworthy? The basics and the values that go into that, so rather than just focus on sort of the topics on objectivity. If you could answer that.
Yeah, I mean, just very quickly, that is right on point. It's a structure where there's a hierarchy of who gets to decide what is newsworthy. And I think there's a serious power problem there, because how are we defining what is newsworthy? Is it what gets attention? Is it what gets clickbait? Is it what is right now a hot topic? Or is it what's ethical, valuable, and important, but then we don't get views and we don't get funding? I think that this is a very dangerous cycle, but if in the essence and the base values of journalism, it's the truth, then I think we really need to rethink how we are deciding what makes it to the headline and what doesn't, yeah.
Yeah, here, please.
Hi, thank you for your talk. I was wondering, has the Media Institute been engaging with other newsrooms over the world, especially in Western countries, before? And like since the genocide in Gaza, and what are some of the your experience and conclusions from that?
Yeah, we are trying. Like recently, we have a conference in Germany itself called the Arab-German Media Dialogue. We try to have a common ground and to talk to our colleagues, to share with them our pain. I don't see like we're supposed to be in the right side, but we have to talk to each other. But we felt like there is a big gap actually between like journalists, and they are divided. And many of our colleagues, they just vanished. When we talk to them about Gaza, covering Gaza, the media bias in many organizations, with BBC, in DW, etc., we told them this is wrong, this is a mistake. Let's have a conversation. No, they just like they shut down everything, and we lost many of our colleagues actually because of that. So yes, and we try to keep. That's why we are here in Europe, in the International Journalism Festival, to talk to our colleagues. We came to Europe, while we are trying to focus on the global South. We try to go to Africa, Latin America, because sometimes we feel, let's turn our face to the South. There is no reason to. What's the meaning of keep shouting if our colleagues, they don't want to listen? Nobody wants to listen. We have tried many times. And sometimes, yes, there's sometimes no right or wrong. Maybe we are not totally right, but there's no conversation at all. And you can see the examples. It's ABC journalism. It just doesn't need like to. Killing kids is not a point of view. So we have sometimes, they taught us to go in a very long cycle for fact-checking and news verification, use these tools, use this methodology, etc. And we spend like hours or days for proving that they're bombing a hospital. They are killing kids. But for them, they are taking the Israeli statements as a matter of fact. Where is the fact-checking? And you give it authority. Because it appears on New York Times, it's believed, it's truth. You give it authority. They are bringing an expert for 5 minutes to talk about Gaza or Palestine or Islam or etc. And he's become a very expert in Germany about Islam. He knows nothing because he came on TV. They gave him an authority. Come on, you invent. I mean, we are new as a journalist in the region, in the Middle East. I learned from BBC Radio. We learned from New York Times, Washington Post, but they failed us. They failed all the values. It's obvious now. And we have to defend, we have to prove that. We have to defend ourselves. It's obvious. And by the way, it didn't happen like today. It's constructed and long time.
Okay, so like we have one more question, and let's go there. It will be the last one.
Hello, thank you for the talk. You spoke about representation in media. You spoke about those UNICEF photos. And as a journalist who reports on marginalized communities in the West, how do you strike a balance between giving them a voice, amplifying their struggles, but not reducing them to their struggles? Because that's often something I grapple with, because I see then that the West perceives them as this community with only problems and nothing else. They become these two-dimensional people who only struggle. So how do you strike a balance? When you spoke about representation, I was curious about that.
Yeah, I think this is such an important question. And I think the word balance that you use is key here, that we are going to show people suffering, but I'm going to add to Muntazir's or repeat Muntazir's point, and we need to emphasize, why is this misery happening? This isn't a naturally occurring catastrophe. It's not a natural catastrophe that no one has a culpability in. This is something that is being caused by a certain structure, and it's worthy of pointing fingers, and it's worthy of clarifying where this is coming from, because if the end goal is reparation and fixing this problem, showing a hungry child isn't really going to solve the problem, but pointing fingers at the person who is causing the famine or the structures that are causing the famine is what's really going to cause the problem, to be honest. I don't think that people looking at a hungry child is going to serve it. I think that people looking at who's culpable is definitely what's going to serve it. So I personally think that this is where the media lenses should go. But I also do think that there needs to be some kind of balance with also showing the resilience of people, showing the capabilities of people, that these people are actually indeed able to lead their own communities. They're able to rebuild. They're able to rebuild their communities in a way that suits their needs and their values. They do not need external interventions. They're actually capable of doing it.
All right, so I think that we have to stick with the time, and the organizers are telling us that we can't take any more questions, so I'm really sorry. But it was a real pleasure to be with you today, and I hope that you have found us a little bit interesting, and we can take the discussions further outside or later on. And thank you for your coming today. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.